In early 2019, when I was slowly gathering interviews to launch the podcast on Spotify, I came upon this unique and gripping podcast, Euphomet. The initial episode title, Beyond the Veil, had me hooked. Jim's methodical and practical approach towards the stories and their paranormal aspects helps the listener understand it more without the spectacle and jump scares that usually accompanies paranormal themed podcasts. He records the actual audio from the location, the casual conversational approach. It all adds to the relaxed documentary feel that I'm obviously a fan of. Euphomet stands out as one of those podcasts that I listen to regularly. And tonight, we talk with Jim Perry, the host and creator of Euphomet. We talk about his early experience with the paranormal, interesting guests he's had, and his foray into the unknown. Enjoy. We have a very special guest. I'll get this out of the way so we can talk freely after. But I'm a big fan of this podcast. I've been referring it to listeners to listen to it. To be honest, when I started to podcast about 2016, it was a very small podcast, and we were inspired by, of course, lore when we started hearing it. But when I found out about Euphomet, it shifted to Euphomet. It's all Euphomet. The way you present your stories, it's very cinematic given that it's a podcast. It's very cinematic, your use of music. So please don't get angry if sometimes I will have some future episodes that are very Euphomet inspired. Because the way you did it was you were really going to these people and getting their stories. And the way you captured it, the way you got natural sound into the story, it was very inspiring for us. So I'll get that out of the way. I'm a big fan. Thank you for accepting to be a guest.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, my friend. And I really look forward to hearing what you produce. And if it's any bit inspired by Euphomet, that just I don't that feels really good, because I think when I started that process of making the show, it was in an effort to peel back the veneer of what I had heard and what I had really enjoyed in broadcasting in terms of paranormal stories, but to go beyond the campfire element and to go beyond the history and really dive into the people behind these stories. It was so important to me. And so anytime there are podcasters that are inspired by uh, digging even deeper, maybe, or just even if they are already challenging themselves to uh, step out into the field sometimes, or produce just trying to bring some cinematic quality to what they're
Yes.
doing too, is like, oh, it feels so good.
Yes.
So yeah, and I've listened to I've listened to some episodes of your show since you introduced yourself, and
Yeah.
I'm loving what you're doing, and I'm so fascinated by your work and some of the people you've talked to.
Yeah. Unfortunately, most of our episodes are, of course, in Tagalog. To give you a brief background, we usually do things anonymously. People who reach out to us want to remain anonymous because the Philippines is mostly a Catholic country, and
Sure.
again, if you share stories like these, sometimes you're branded as touched by a demon or something like that. So
Sure.
most of our guests remain anonymous. We have to give them fake names. Me, I don't give out my real name because again, I will be branded by my relatives, my parents. So I don't tell them about this. Similar to one thing you said, I think in one of your episodes, you said that you cannot judge the people who come to you and tell you their stories because it's their story and you're just there to relay it and to share it with the world. So me, I cannot be the critic. I cannot be the naysayer of what they're saying, and I just have to, again, I have to share what they're sharing. And it's very similar to what you're doing. You're actually, when I heard Euphomet, it really resonated with me because I kind of feel I'm doing this. I'm not saying I kind of feel I'm doing the same thing here. Your show is a little bit bigger in terms of scope. So, Jim, if I may ask, it's usual for us to ask this question, but again, for you, how did it start for you? I read that your interview in the Democrat Gazette. You told that story about the ball, so you can start with that. But you didn't expound on it.
Sure, yeah. That's interesting. I don't remember telling that story to them, but I'm sure I did. And that was a really fun interview to do, actually. I was very lucky to grow up in a household where paranormal thought, the idea of unusual or strange things occurring to us, was generally accepted. A history of, sort of ghost stories and cryptid sightings. Some of it was campfire tale, right? Some of it was just family lore. But there were portions of it that were directly related to families having incredible experiences they couldn't explain. And so when I would have something occur to me as a young child, it would generally be accepted, and I wouldn't get any sense of pushback or ostracization from my family. The incident you're referring to is one of my earliest memories of something strange, and that was sitting in my safe space as a kid, which was the front room of my great grandparents. I have a World War II vet grandpa, chain smoking on the
Yeah.
Davenport, as they would call it.
Yes.
And we would watch TV there in the front room. On this particular day, it was just me alone, sitting cross-legged in front of this old tube TV. This was early 80s, of course, and out of nowhere, this ball emits from the screen of the television, and this bright blue electric specter of a ball flew past me. I chased it down into the kitchen, which was also where the front door was located of this particular house, and I watched it take a sharp corner, head from the kitchen right out the front door, and and then disappear into infinity. I don't know.
Yeah.
Since then, I've found out about things like ball lightning, but there's also a part of me that when I hear those stories about sacred mountains, of paranormally active vaulted locations, there is very similar experiences that people have with these balls,
Yes.
with these like balls of energy. So you know that was something that I saw, no one else saw. It was
Yeah.
just me, and I'll never forget it. And it was just one of those things where it's like I felt out of the ordinary, even if it was something scientifically explainable. It didn't matter to me because it had an effect. And I think once you start experiencing those things and you live in a situation where your family says like, no, yeah, weird stuff happens,
Mm-hmm,
these
mm-hmm.
things occur, you can start getting into a system of belief that allows you to be open-minded to a lot of different things. And it's not until you're, I think, encountered with a contrasting force of
Yes.
someone going like, no, that's not
Yeah.
real, or
Yeah.
hey, focus on something else, that for people like me that can kind of slip away. But yeah, that was an early experience I had, and one that I'll never forget.
Can I ask? You mentioned that your family also had these unexplained experiences. Can you share at least one or two of those with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I love telling people about the side of my mother's family. Always provided really interesting stories, and so did my dad's side, but in a different way. And I can explain a little bit on that too.
Yeah.
But essentially, my grandpa would tell us stories about running into a Sasquatch while logging in the
Mm-hmm.
Pacific Northwest. Now, this was his full-time job,
Yeah.
through the 70s and 80s. He was up in those remote hills. Anyone who would look at these areas would say consistently, well, if Sasquatch does exist, this is exactly where he would be. He
Yeah.
or she or they would be. And he would tell me these stories about, encountering him and his logging crew encountering these beasts. And in particular, corroborated one story with my grandma. They told a story to me one time about them driving through the forest together,
Mm-hmm.
one of these old logging roads, and stopping at this bluff. And there was a hill above them as to where rocks were being thrown at their
Mm-hmm.
car.
Yeah.
Like, what? Somebody, what's going on? Is it avalanche? Is someone messing
Yeah.
with us? And my grandpa looked his head out. My grandma looked her head out, and according to them, this huge Sasquatch was standing on the side of the cliff
Yeah.
above their car, throwing rocks at them.
Yes.
And they took off like bats out of hell and went back to town. And it was shortly after there that I think my grandpa started working in a mill and stopped going out into the forest all the time. But it's those type of things that, whether that was a campfire story or not, it helped inform my curiosity and led me to voraciously read as much paranormal content I could get my hands with.
Yes.
When I was a kid, it was like, can I find the Bigfoot book in this library? And maybe they had one or two,
Yeah.
and it would set off these situations. It extended this kind of power, this gracious power of belief that was bestowed on me by my family, extended to my grandfather and my mother having this really incredible relationship. My mom called it ESP,
Yes.
and I would witness on a daily basis, sometimes multiple times a day, my mom walking over and picking up the phone and just starting to talk to my grandmother before it even had a chance to ring.
Yes.
And on the other side too, I remember my grandma walking over to the phone. They just knew when each other was calling
Yes.
without any sort of rings
Yes.
ever. And it was weird to other people, and it's weird for me to think about it, and it's weird when I ask my mom about it now. But then it became commonplace, and it was
Yes.
just it wasn't even a family joke. It was just, yeah, that's how it is. And so that's how I grew up,
Yeah.
my friend. I grew up in a place where the extraordinary was normal, and I feel very lucky for that, very confident, and I think it helped me turn into the person I am now, which hopefully is one that tries to be as empathetic as possible, and share a little of that, like, sort of familial love with others who maybe, like, as you're saying, like, have um uh, let's just say that they would perhaps be judged much more harshly than I was
Yes.
for having a belief in this or an interest in this or having an experience.
Yeah. For the two people who came in the room, actually, Sam grew up seeing the whole spectrum. He could see. He grew up feeling that, oh, there's so many people around me, but he didn't know that some of them were spirits. And he would wake up sometimes. Sam, I'm telling a story for you. Would wake up and see someone on top of a tree waving at him, and of course he would see spirits walking nearby. And for Liz, on the other hand, she has an affinity with human spirits, and it's not the same as some people would say, that she doesn't see them bloodied and all that, but she sees them as normal people, and she couldn't tell if they were real or not, because if they were alive or not, because she would see them as real people. And for a time, she felt that she kept it to herself, and she felt that she was crazy because she would see things that other people wouldn't see. And so again, for here in the Philippines, because of religion, organized religion, well, Catholic religion, that people keep it to themselves, and just share it to people like us. You
Yeah.
mentioned in one of your episodes that it could be inherited, and from the people we've talked to, we feel that it is inherited, but not for all. But do you feel that you've probably inherited some of it from your mom?
I've been told I have.
Okay.
I've been told I have. I mean, I always get very. This is definitely a personal thing that I'm working through, and with the help from a lot of friends and varied opinions. But I have a really hard time describing myself as having abilities, and it might be for the sake, and this just for me personally, for the sake of those others that I'm communicating with, that I'm desperately trying to tell their story. because there is a power in that identity. There is a defined quality to accepting that mantle, I think, of having abilities, right? And so
Yes.
I always yeah, it's I love that you asked that question, and I always like get a little shy about it,
Yeah.
because I haven't come to that place personally where I want to accept that mantle. But I mean, the lineage on my mother's side that produced those ESP abilities and
Yeah.
those experiences that I had, witnessing that, uh, uh, comes from a line of indigenous peoples that were a part of my family.
Mm-hmm.
And these indigenous peoples, these Native Americans, this line of women called themselves white witches.
Okay.
And this was sort of an adoption of the patriarchal term, from what I've read.
Yes.
In, these like white folks don't understand that we're telling them that we possess some sort of shamanic abilities or medicine work or whatever it may have been. So we'll adopt these terms that they recognize, and a white witch is something that would be recognized as something, as doing positive, magical workings, I suppose. So, that was, my great grandmother,
Mm-hmm.
on my mother's side, was, kind of brought that to the table in terms of the family lineage. and
Yeah.
and there's been some very sweet, um some sweet stories I've been told about, kind of like a deathbed passing of powers,
Yeah.
where, essentially my grandma shared that her mother, my great grandmother, held her hand on her deathbed and said, the it's yours now.
Yeah.
Like, this power is going to be yours. And it just so happened with the last couple of years that same scenario happened between my mother and my grandmother,
Mm-hmm.
on my grandmother's deathbed. So, I believe that there is a possibility of inheriting these abilities. And there's also an ability to inherit some of the, more extreme, maybe negative side effects of certain, awarenesses, right? There's a lot of evidence to suggest that those that experience something that would qualify as abductions,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so did their mom and so did their grandma. And, there's it's funny, it comes back to what you were talking about in terms of the temperament of the Philippines and how judgment plays such a huge role in our inability to share, the true nature of who we are.
Yes.
Look back in history, and that's across the board everywhere,
Yes.
right? And so
Yes.
there's even individuals that, believe that, um let's just say there's other individuals that identify as a different gender or
Yes.
identify as a different sexuality,
Yes.
that, a lot of people look back in history and will go, well, where are those people? And it's like, those people were all there.
Yeah.
They just weren't saying anything
Yeah.
about it because they couldn't,
Yeah.
right?
That's true.
Like,
Yes.
the stakes were much higher. And so I think that's what we're seeing with the, potentially the abductee phenomenon, with, individuals with psychic abilities, potentially with those that have different awarenesses. There is seemingly a strain of inherited abilities that exist there. But I must also mention that, there's also a part of me that believes that belief it factors heavily into our involvement
Mm-hmm.
in these experiences in general. And so when you start looking at the implications of how consciousness plays a part in
Yes.
our relationship to whatever is beyond that veil, is it possible that, these shared levels or inherited levels of a heightened consciousness around these things, or an acceptance around these things because of that family story,
Yeah.
allows us to simply open that door as to where the kid next door never got that support?
Yeah.
Not to say that's always the situation, because there's so many others that, as you mentioned, Sam, like maybe has these abilities, but is forced to keep them quiet, or led to believe by other people that they're bad, or that you're going to hell for it.
Yeah.
So John Tenney and
Yeah.
and some others, and I'm ranting now, I'm sorry, but
Yeah.
like
It's okay. Go ahead. Just feel free.
some would suggest that the phenomenon doesn't care what we think, and the phenomenon doesn't care if we believe it's going to do its thing. But I would argue that the phenomenon also doesn't know if we're paying attention or not sometimes. And a lot of people, they don't pay attention. It's not a part of their conscious state of being. They're kind of locked into their consensus 3D reality,
Yes.
and they're rolling along. So if inheritance, and if inheriting these things is by nature or nurture, maybe it's both.
Hmm.
That's what I think. Maybe
Yeah.
it's a little of both.
Now that you say it, it makes more. I mean, it makes sense to me because one of the people we've talked to, who is again a sensitive or a psychic, said that she said that she's been in the field for 40 plus years. When she was, I think, when she was in college, when she entered college, she met someone who became her mentor. But she said that it's in all of us. Everyone has that sensitivity, and when you say it's nature or nurture, if it's nurtured in the family, it comes out. And if it's not, I mean, in my case, probably I have it. Everyone has it, but it hasn't been nurtured, so it hasn't come out also. I have a theory to that, and these two will laugh at me because I keep going back to this.
I'm
Yeah,
curious. I'm
yeah.
curious.
So, are
Great.
you familiar? I've heard you mention it, but not a lot. You've mentioned the Theosophical Society of Madame Blavatsky.
Sure.
Yeah. So,
Mm-hmm.
she has that theory. They have that theory about the root races.
Mm.
So we are in the fifth, I think. We're in the fifth root race. And the third root race is the Lemurian civilization. And
Mm.
one of the famous parapsychologists we talked to, he said that the Philippines was a part of that root race, part of the Philippines. That's why I realize sometimes that there are a lot of Filipinos who have that sensitivity. A lot of people are saying that. So
Mm.
I have a feeling that that root race, part of it was here in the Philippines and the lower part of the Philippines. That's why we get a lot of stories from that lower part, from that southern part of the Philippines. And I have a feeling that, again, these people with these abilities, with these inherent sensitivity to the unseen world, they come from that root race. That's just me. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just my theory on it.
Right. Right. It's interesting. It's so fascinating, and I mean, what's really fascinating to me is how other countries and other cultures, interpret or think about different classical works, such as Blavatsky's work.
Mhm.
In the United States, especially in the sort of awakening that a lot of folks are having right now
Yeah.
here, in terms of things like racial inequality that are bubbling up.
Yeah.
There's a lot of old new thought. I'll say it that way.
Yeah.
Old new thought that has been challenged by certain communities because we're very sensitive to talking about things of that nature right now. So anything that elicits an idea or a conversation about things such as root races, for example,
Yes.
are very, some would say, problematic, like in this country right now, and like tricky to kind of like dictate and talk about. But I think what we're also seeing is that there is such a vast opportunity to reflect upon what those other belief systems have been throughout the ages, right?
Yes.
And especially, it's also very fun to break down and see what those possibilities of thought experiments were by people like Blavatsky and the other new thought leaders and those in the occult, right? And to see, like, what are some of the commonalities between what we're looking at here,
Yes.
and how does that inform some of our understanding of where some of this could be, or is there opportunity within this material to understand how we can better relate to one another within the context of this strange? And so
Yes.
what's interesting to me is this idea that places like the Philippines, perhaps extra charged because of some sort of connection to this concept of Lemuria,
Yeah.
right? And all that holds. And for people, I mean, maybe that's something you guys talk about a lot. I haven't talked a lot about Lemuria on the show, except and I've just been talking to friends
Yeah.
about things like this,
Yes.
because it gets to the point where it's like it's some of the weirdest stuff, it's some of the weirdest stuff, but it those ideas and what has been written have informed every contemporary idea of the paranormal sense.
Yes.
So yeah, it's fascinating to me. Yeah, I've never heard that about like the Philippines. That's really
Yeah.
fascinating.
So they're saying a part of it, but I tend to backtrack sometimes, so there won't be a clear structure. So I hope you don't mind.
Oh yeah, no
Yeah.
worries.
Okay.
Oh,
So
good.
when you mentioned that story about your grandfather and grandmother with the Sasquatch, I'm not sure if you've heard about it in the Philippines. We have this cryptid. You could say it's a cryptid, but we call it a capre.
Mm.
The capre is technically it's a tree elemental. It's tall, it's dark, it's hairy, and you see it in the woods. So, and people have seen it. Sam has seen it. Sam has seen it. And
Wow.
technically, they are elementals. So, again, the parapsychologist told us there's this person, Allan Kardec. He had the Book of Spirits. He's a French person. I don't know what year it came out, but he deconstructed the elementals. So technically, they are. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but technically they are earth elementals. We have rock elementals. We have water elementals. We have. I mean, this technically mermaids. I mean, this is based on the people we've talked to, but
Sure.
mermaids are water elementals, and the capre is a tree. Sam, if I'm correct, is that right? Tree or earth elemental? Is a tree elemental. So it kind of makes sense to me that when people say Bigfoot or Sasquatch and they see it in the woods, same here. They see these big hairy. The only difference is here they're darker, and they smoke tobacco for some reason. And Sam said,
Oh wow.
yeah, and Sam said the reason they say it smokes tobacco is because you smell that tobacco smell. But in reality, not
Interesting.
all of these creatures smoke tobacco. And
Yeah.
I remember one of your episodes. Sorry, I forgot who you were talking to, but he said that the Sasquatch or the Bigfoot talks telepathically. And they're saying it's a quantum creature because it disappears again, because it is,
Yeah.
from our understanding, these are spirits and they live in a separate dimension. They slip in and
Right.
out. So
Yeah.
there. So my theory is Bigfoot, Sasquatch, they are technically tree elementals. So I'm not sure if you would
Yeah.
agree with that or what. Sam, you're going to say something? Yes.
Hmm. Mhm, mhm.
Middle East. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. To give context to that story, we talked again to that woman who we talked to who had 47 years of experience. She said that I asked her the same question. When you go to different countries, she goes to Sedona for the Crystal Fair, I think. But they ask her, when you go to different countries, do you see the same elementals that we have? Because I wanted to know if we have more or we have less. I don't know. And she said, yes, when I see dwarves, we call them duende here, which is a Spanish term. we have when we sees dwarves in different countries, their faces are similar to the natives of that country. So the theory there is they adapt to whatever they are nearest to. So I'm not sure if there are stories that you've heard that you haven't shared with your podcast about this.
Sure. I mean, I think about this a lot, and especially in terms of looking at old UFO literature.
Mm-hmm.
You know, before there was sort of the gray alien
Yeah.
that was popular in our consciousness, or the little green men, it was a lot of human-like beings.
Yes.
And these human-like beings, towards the end of the 1800s, were in dirigibles. Basically, they were in floating balloon ships. They were in blimps, essentially.
Yeah.
And these blimps would land, and out would walk essentially normal, just white folks.
Yeah.
Would stand out in the field, and they'd sometimes give people pancakes that tasted bad, and they would have this exchange. Somewhere along the line, um cultural influence within with the image that the phenomenon takes is just becomes so clear. Even within not just the elements of who is within that cultural space, who is there, but also I think it reflects things like internal paranoia and trauma within the
Mm-hmm.
zeitgeist.
Mm-hmm.
You would see situations where, when the United States was very paranoid about or suffering from post trauma from war with Asian countries,
Yes.
you would see, like, this term might be loaded. At least it is here. We don't use it anymore, but
Yeah.
they would say the space people, or it would be the Men in Black,
Yeah.
or even some of the space people would be Oriental in how they looked.
Yeah.
And so that was occurring at a time when there was like this tense kind of paranoia
Yeah.
over what our battles were or were
Yeah.
going to be. And so I think, I think it's almost all elemental, honestly.
Okay. Okay.
The more I go along with this, I think there's more. I think if we are to find any answers, which maybe we never will,
Yeah.
I think it lies somewhere within the quantum space. It lies somewhere within, the study of consciousness. It lies somewhere there. It lies in multidimensionality potentially.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I don't think these things are all physical all the time.
Yes, that's true.
And I've had people, have this experience in one of the recent episodes of Euphomet. I had this great story where this woman identifies as a witch. She lives on this island out on the coast of Washington State, very close to where I had lived for a very long time. And these islands are, they're not desolate, but they're very remote. You have to go get there by boat. It's always foggy. It always looks like a Stephen King novel or, Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
And she's going down the road after feeding her friend's cat. She's going down the road in her car, and her headlights hit this incredible silhouette on the side of the road. She gets closer and realizes that this is a wolf-like creature, is how she describes it. It's essentially a wolf man.
Mm-hmm.
They lock eyes. This thing is terrified, and it darts away, and she takes a corner and turns up the road and is rattled.
Yeah.
She's like, oh my God, what did I just see? I saw that was a wolf man. What?
Yeah.
That was a dog creature. What was that? And she starts thinking about it, and as kind of that shock subsides, she starts to realize that thing was so scared. It was scared of me. I was like, it was more scared of me than I was of it. She was like, oh my God, I was the UFO. Like my car, my lights shine. Like I was the UFO. I was intruding into its space. And so that got me really starting to think about our relationship and how we always feel these things are coming into our space. But
We're
what if
coming into
we're
them.
also going into their space?
Yeah.
What if we're also on occasion the intruders in this? And there's just some sort of conversation that we have forgot how to have with this other side of the veil.
Yeah. That's a constant story here in the Philippines because of progress, because of industrialization and all that. We expand into more spaces that are used to be part of nature. So we would get a lot of stories of. We actually talked to a feng shui master recently, and he said that a school was being haunted, and so he went there. He's psychic. He went there, and he had this piece of wood removed because he said, "Oh, this piece of wood is there's a heavy feeling on it." And one of the people who moved it suddenly came back to him, and he could see that this person was possessed. He was possessed by an elemental.
Oh, wow.
And when the elemental came to him, the elemental said, "Why are you moving this tree? We've been here longer than you. Why are you doing this?" And he had to negotiate. He had to find a way to negotiate. And again, there are a lot of stories of people saying the same things. That this is a theory from one of the psychics we've talked to. They said that, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. I haven't heard it from your podcast, but whatever emotions we give out, negative and positive emotions we give out, it also we have elementals all around us. And whatever emotions we give out, we also affect them. So if we have a very negative household or negative disposition, whatever elementals are in our vicinity, they absorb it also. They're usually passive, but if you push that out, it gets to them and it manifests in them. They become evil or they become good. So that's one of the things they say. Sorry, I'll just tell you this story. One of the more interesting stories I've heard.
Please.
So back in the 90s, there was a group here in the Philippines. They're called Spirit Questers. They studied under this person who taught shamanism. And mostly he recruited sensitive people who could see. But again, I'm sure from the people you've talked to, you would see that psychics have different strengths, right? Some could do remote viewing, some could see spirits, some could be more sensitive with the seeing the future. So again, they have different abilities, and they investigate. They're technically paranormal investigators. They have cases every Saturdays. They help people without payment. They help people with problems with elementals or spirits. And one interesting story was there's a big lake here in the Philippines, and a kid died, I think. And they talked to the water elemental, the Undine, and they asked, why are you doing this? Why are you taking one soul per year? And the Undine or the water elemental said that there was let's say there was a shaman before, years back, who did something to us, and we're just doing it in retaliation. It's like a curse on this land. And then she saw via her mind's eye that these water elementals were keeping souls in jars. I mean, she didn't say, "Oh, I didn't see the jar," but in my mind's eye, I could see that they were keeping these souls that they were getting. And she asked, "Why are you keeping the souls?" And the water elemental said, "Oh, we're keeping that as a bargaining tool when the end of the world comes, so that we have something to bargain with." And that thought said to me that they also don't know what's happening. I mean, they have their own belief system, and they don't know really what's. They have their own religion. They have their own faith. Yeah. So again, that was very interesting for us.
Oh, that's fascinating. I mean, so many people, I think, when they get into this stuff, there's this idea of almost an all-knowing aspect to it, right? Like the ghost knows the answer, or they know the answer on the other side. And the idea to take a step back and go like, wait, what? Why? Who said? Like maybe
Yeah.
they're just as confused as we
Yes.
are.
Yes.
You know, that's brilliant.
So I'm not sure if you got into that. You're more. I would say you're more bookish and you're more methodical when it comes to your guests. But have you noticed similarities when you talk with people who have abilities? I mean, in terms of what they experience or their abilities.
Yeah. Oh man, that is a great question. There are similarities, but I think based on a person's natural disposition
Mm,
and their whatever their relationship to consensus reality is really informs how they present, um, what they are willing to believe
mm-hmm.
or endorse.
Yeah.
So I think there's an element of risk involved for individuals who are gifted,
Yeah.
who um, inherently believe so strongly about certain things, about either themselves or the nature of how all this works, that that are the ones where the stories are, from a storyteller's perspective, like
Yes.
more complex to try to tell sometimes. And the reason why is that when I help individuals tell their stories, I really do want to help them connect with as many people as possible. Because
Yes.
at the root of what I do is to help those experiencing this phenomenon or these abilities or whatever it may be, connect with others who may be feeling similar but feel alone,
Yeah.
right? And I want those people to feel less alone. So sometimes surety is, I think, the wrong thing to display in those situations,
Mm.
and instead an ability to say, well, what if?
Oh, yeah.
Not this is how it is, but
Yes. Yes.
what if? And that would be uh, it's a great question. That's why I'm having to
It's
kind of
okay.
contextualize it as I go along, because I think that that is one of the qualities of the individuals that I talk to that do believe they have certain abilities and have experiences to qualify that for themselves, is what is their relationship to consensus reality, and how does that affect how they present themselves, and how does that affect their gifts
Yeah.
in general? Because, and I'm not judging by saying that either. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not
Yeah.
placing a judgment on anybody. If someone has great abilities and also a tremendous amount of answers about things that maybe in my own belief I don't know if we can have answers to, maybe they're just on a whole other level.
Yes.
And what I'm bringing into it is not a judgment on that, but I do have to pay attention to what other people's prejudgments may be, and if I can
Yes.
help individuals tell their stories in a way where they're not turning people off,
Yes.
um, I try to do that a little bit, especially if there's good intent there.
Yeah.
I want to help preserve what that good intent is. I hope that answered your
Yes.
question a
Yes.
little bit.
Yes.
It
It
was,
does.
it was a great one.
Actually, it brings me to another question. How has your, I mean, I haven't asked, but how has your view or belief system changed after all the people you've talked to?
Mm,
Has it
mm.
changed? Has it shifted from when you were, again, before you started before you started Euphomet?
I think that I've found I'm both more skeptical and more a believer than what I ever thought. uh, there are some things that I am so drawn to within the study or the exploration of the phenomenon, where I catch myself and I go, man, I'm completely bought in, like
Yeah.
hook, line, and sinker on this, and I am so into it.
Yes.
And like, can I trust myself as the sort of the am I a reliable narrator for this,
Yeah.
right? Thinking if I'm to think about it journalistically, which maybe is a problem in its own.
Yeah.
And then there's other things that I find myself having natural judgments and snapping into reacting instead of respecting.
Yeah.
And that I learn a lot about myself in that regard too, about what are some of my hangups, because just because someone's reality is different than mine does not mean that it's wrong,
That's
right?
true. Yeah.
So, I think if anything, my work with Euphomet has confirmed some suspicions that I
Okay.
had. And those suspicions, a chief suspicion would be, uh, I don't know anything.
Yeah. That's true.
I
That's
I
true.
know less than what I thought I knew. And the more I'm out there, the more it's proved to me.
Yes.
And that's listen, that's a challenging and also a wonderful place to be, I think. A
Yeah.
place where you're you're not atheistic,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not ambivalent, but you are engaged in the unknown of it all and okay with not knowing. And I see a lot of people, and I love it. A lot of people are into this for answers and to find answers, and I really respect that. And I think those are some of the heroes of the field. These are great journalists, they're great researchers, they're great podcast hosts, and they really want to get to the bottom of certain things. And that we need that for sure. I have just found myself in a complete understanding that that's not me. And anytime uh I'm pushed in that direction to try to corroborate evidence, find these dates,
Yeah.
back up this story with
Yeah.
scientific evidence,
Yeah.
I get a pit in my stomach and I go like, no, I don't want to do that.
Yeah. I feel the same way.
Somebody else's job
Yeah.
who's way more qualified than me.
Yeah.
So
I remember saying that to the audience, to the listeners, that it's not for me to do that. It's for you to be the skeptic. If there are things that do not connect with you, that you do not believe, then find out. I mean, I will find out what I can, but I mean, that stuff is up to you or up to other people. I was intrigued by when you said that there are certain things that you are drawn to. So what are those things that you're inclined to believing easily?
oh um man, I am a sucker for the entire UFO phenomenon.
Okay.
You know, um, I've I've had experiences with seeing anomalous lights, and I have many times,
Yeah.
in my opinion, per my perspective.
Yes.
And there have also been occasions where I fool myself and I think I've seen something extraordinary, but immediately it's confirmed as something pedestrian. And so I know I'm ready to believe, and I'm ready to jump in
Yeah.
to anything relating, a mysterious lit object in the sky. And in accordance to that, I am fascinated by the experiencer phenomenon, and the story of contact and the story of abductees.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on, and again, that's not my job. But the cultural implication of I don't and again, it's different in the United States. In the United
Yes.
States, all right, to set the table, you can most usually be accepted by mainstream culture if you've seen a ghost,
Yes.
if you say you have premonitions,
Mm-hmm.
depending on what communities you are in, especially if you're in a more yogic or metaphysical community, then the doors open to all sorts of mystical experiences that are welcomed and you're not judged by. If you've seen now, because of the New York Times story and
Yeah.
the emergence of UAP phenomenon, and
UAPs. Yeah.
you can now be in the United States, maybe mostly in the Western world, and see a mysterious lit object in the sky, a UFO, and you won't be judged, and people will be curious and they want to talk about it. Yet the subset of individuals that identify themselves as abductees are still very much on the fringe of what people are willing to accept or even go into, even if it's suggested that there is something more metaphysical happening. The Our culture right now, especially in this country, are still very lock in step with these are all if this is real, these are physical things,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yes.
if UFOs, if we can't explain what they are, then automatically it's an alien. They're not even going to the space where a lot of quantum scientists are going,
Yes.
that are saying like, guys, listen, we're trying to tell you, like, no, we might know, like, kind of what, like, let's talk about this in a more scientific way over here, because it could be more strange than aliens, is what we're trying to tell you. So we're not even there yet. So I'm fascinated with the stories of those individuals who, for decades, have this feeling that they've been visited, that things have been perpetrated on them,
Yes.
that they have these intruders essentially that, in some cases are benevolent wisdom machines that, share life lessons with them, and others that are, completely should have said benevolent if I said malevolent.
Yeah.
These are the ones that are malevolent
Yes.
and are dark forces for
Infringing
them.
on the
And
free will.
yeah, 100%. So yeah, I am satisfyingly obsessed with the connection of the occult world and channeling and its relationship to the abductee, the experiencer movement, and UFOs, and what role consciousness may have in all of this. So when I'm geeking out, I'm reading I'm reading old books on that stuff, and I'm learning up on the history and learning about guys like Al Bender and reading Gray Barker, and and then going back to my favorites like John Keel, and thinking about ultra terrestrials, and that's that's my spot for all this stuff personally.
Yeah. Have we got some stories for you?
Oh,
So,
my man.
yeah. So personally, again, these two are already laughing in our chat group, but yeah, this is one of, again, my personal favorites. I mean, a deep dive into this. And I think 3 weeks ago, or sorry, maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, we got to talk with another spirit quester. She was a spirit quester in the 90s, late 90s, and eventually she shifted from just talking with spirits and all that. She shifted to plant-based. I'm not sure if it's plant-based medicine or, anyway, it's all plant-based for her, and it's kind of more shamanistic. And she started communicating with aliens, and this is a consistent thing with other stories we've read online. And so I asked her, what are these aliens? What are the aliens? And she said, again, without judgment, she said, I'm just telling you what I see and who I've talked to. So I'm sure you've deep dived into this, you've geeked out about this, you've heard about this. She's talking with positive aligned ETs. So these are the Pleiadians, I think Syrians, and they're telling her things that might happen, and they're telling her. So I'm sure you've heard of the Ascension of Earth as of this year. It all started for us because Liz, earlier part of this year, February, I think, she reached out because she felt that her kids were being haunted. She asked us if we knew anyone who could take away the third eye of her child because she felt that her kid could see. So I didn't know anybody. Eventually, we found an exorcist. He's not a priest, but he's an exorcist. He does exorcisms. And after our session of cleansing with Liz, he told us that for some reason at the start of this year, more people are seeing things. They're seeing elementals, they're seeing spirits. He said that for some reason, the frequencies are mixing. There's a movement of the earth that there's a reason that there's a mix in the frequencies, and that's why we're seeing more of them.
Hmm.
And of course, I didn't know about the age of Aquarius. I didn't know about the Earth Ascension. And every time we would have a psychic in the call, I would ask that, have you been noticing it also? And again, when we talked to Maria, the light worker, she explained to us that Earth was ascending into that, I'm not sure if it's the fifth or the fourth dimension, fourth density. So the aliens are here to help us move into that other density. And there are negative aligned entities, or let's say ETs, who are pushing back because they don't want Earth to ascend to that. So these are the reptilian, supposedly, reptilian and negative aligned Orions. So again, when this was being told to us by, again, it was being told to us in Filipino, in Tagalog. It was like, what? There are Filipinos who communicate, and
Yeah.
again, it was a big shock to us, and
Yeah.
I was all in. I believed it all the way. When she was telling me, I believed you. I believe you, because for the common folk, it's just grace. And apparently, she said, this is what she said. She said that grace were from the future. All the aliens are from the future. We are in their past, technically. Right now, we are in their past, and they've been here ever since. And the mission is coming to a fruition sometime in, I think, 60 or 100 years. It's coming. And they're trying to move us because apparently whatever we evolve into, we do something horrendous in the future.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. And they're trying to move us away from that. If you've been hearing the same things. And so we are from the past. And grace are supposedly us in the future. But some of them are, that's why she's saying that they are negative aligned because they encroach on our free will. The other positive aligned ETs, they cannot encroach on our free will. They cannot abduct. So most of the abductees have seen grace because they are the ones who are doing the, yeah. So there, I have some more shockers for you, but we could start there with what you've heard. Yeah.
It's fascinating, man. I mean, spending time in some of these really trippy locations in the United States, like Sedona, for example, or East Ranch in Washington State, you begin to be surrounded by this sort of metaphysical UFO community. And it's one of the personally, one of the things that scare me the most is like the paintings, the strange paintings that are out there of these different alien races and all of these stories. And then when some of these individuals, they are committed to the idea of what these stories represent. And to me, being surrounded in that place, it reminds me of being in church. It reminds me of a new religion. And, so the other part of growing up, on my mom's side, it was all ESP and Sasquatch and everything else. On my dad's side, my grandfather was a Pentecostal preacher. And, Pentecostal, that's speaking in tongues, that's healing with your hands. If you want to look at the snake charmers, the snake holders, and in rural parts of America, even to this day, that's Pentecostal church. And so going to a space when I was really young, we didn't have to go to church often. We never really had to go, but on occasion when we would go, sitting next to this kindly old woman that in the middle of the service starts breaking into hysterics and speaking in this foreign language at the top of her voice, in a different voice, mind you, in a different pitch. You feel like you're on a different planet. You feel like this is not home base anymore. And so, the closest I've had to that experience is being at a place like East Ranch and seeing the true commitment of some of those individuals, hearing people speak in light language, which is this channeled chanting language assumed from some of these beings. It starkly reminded me of that feeling I had as a little kid. And it was this feeling of like something very human is going on here. This is not all intervention, seemingly from something else. And listen, I could be wrong. Maybe it is 100%. But just personally, it's one of those places where, as into, like you were saying, like that history of it, when I've experienced individuals that have been so deep on the other side of it that they've almost lost their tether to be able to communicate to others about it. And then it's like, oh, well, then that's a shame. Because if they are telling you all this great information and they're sharing these very important things,
Yeah.
you have to still figure out a way to be grounded enough to tell
Yes,
that to other
that's true.
people so it matters.
Yes.
Or you're just going to be there alone with
Yeah.
the bird-beaked blue Aryans, and
Yeah.
we're going to be we're going to be waiting for some sign as the world is ending. So
I actually asked her that. So I said, knowing all of this, knowing all of the information they've given to you, how do you keep sane? I asked her, how do you keep sane? How do
Yeah.
you? Yeah. So she said, again, the term you used, she had to ground herself.
Yeah.
She had to live with her family. She had to do chores. She had to understand. And I asked her, knowing all of this, what have you been doing? She said, I have to keep alive. I have to do a job, and I have to earn money. I have to to support myself. When you spoke about channeling, again, this is another thing I want to ask you, and if you've heard of it. So we've talked to this girl in Amsterdam, and she's a channel, but she says that when I initially talked to her from Reddit, she told me that she has synesthesia, so she could see aura around people. She joined a group in Amsterdam. Sometimes they would channel demons, but the others would channel light beings, and they would question the demon for information. Again, they were trying to learn, and she said, particularly, there were for several times there was an entity. The best thing she could describe it as was a time spirit, and it would channel her, and it was grumpy, it was angry at humans, but whenever it would channel her, she would see the timeline. Yeah. So have you heard about the time spirit? Because I was intrigued. What is that time spirit, or have you heard of anything like that?
I really haven't. I've heard of others experiencing something similar in psychedelic states of being able to tap into that time stream, essentially. And sometimes that being accompanied by an elf-like creature or a dwarf or some sort of shamanistic elemental sort of entity that is
Yeah.
demonstrating to them this flow of time and these different points and these ripples. And I've even heard of people, engaging to the point where they're sort of touching the stream almost.
Yes.
Inception, I think he maybe does that. Even there's where he kind of discovers this stream of, so what does that mean? I think what is really fascinating is when there is this level of information that is being displayed to some individuals, and that's really fascinating, that then one person sees it through synesthesia and having this ability to kind of channel, and then others have it through this self-imposed initiation
Yes.
of something like psychedelics.
Yes.
And it's sort of like bridging the gap of like, what does that say about like that field of awareness in these altered states being able to present different frequencies to us. That's fascinating, but I've never heard of a time spirit before.
Yeah.
And now I think I'm going to be mildly obsessed with that idea.
We still are. We're still trying to find out. Was it ayahuasca, the psychedelics they were taking?
Yeah.
Ayahuasca. Okay, yeah. So she said also she was taking when she would communicate with the starseed, when she would communicate with the aliens, mostly they would do ayahuasca guided
Yeah.
sessions also to communicate.
Can the interview with the individual from Amsterdam with synesthesia,
Yeah.
that's on your feed?
Yeah, I'll share it to you.
Fantastic. That's great.
I'll share it to you.
Yeah, awesome. I can't wait to hear that.
Probably towards the end, I'll ask you about scarier experiences because, again, our podcast started out just telling stories about scary experiences, and then it evolved into. I mean, you probably felt the same way that the more you dive deeper, the wider the paranormal spectrum goes. Yeah, right. But
Yeah.
a few weeks ago, again, we got to talk with a girl who does tarot reading, and the more we talked to her, she told us about when she would astral travel. There would be a tall man in a hat. She was telling us all about that, and she would describe the astral realm when she would see it as a dark place. It would be a dark place. It's similar to the Stranger Things. I forgot what they call it.
Sure. The upside down.
The upside down. So that's a perfect description, she said, of the astral realm. A few days later, we're talking with another guest, and she's telling us all about her experiences when she would travel. For her, it was in her dreams, but she would describe that place as something dark. And I asked her, "Does it look like the upside down?" She said yes. And she would encounter this tall guy in a hat, and sometimes there was a woman with her, and he would offer her candies. And then I remember that story of the girl who does tarot. I told her, come in. Let's try to connect if you're encountering the same entity in the astral realm. And then the strange thing was, when they were describing that endless corridor, they were completing each other's sentences. They didn't know each other. They were completing. They were saying there was like a classroom. They were saying that there were guards looking over children. Then I found out that there is a subreddit just for the Hat Man. So, from the people you've talked to or people who've gone to the astral realm or the astral plane, have you heard of this Hat Man? Or
I haven't. It's fascinating. I think the closest thing that I've heard to in regards to a Hat Man is something they call in Northern California the Watchers.
okay,
And it's this phenomenon of individuals being in Northern California, the mountains, the Sierras, and having these fleeting experiences with these tall, lanky, humanoid creatures, these entities that also have sort of these brimmed hats on. Usually this is happening, towards sunset. They're sort of on they're actually very close to how you described the Sasquatch like entity there in the Philippines is what people see with these watchers, or some would describe them as hat men.
okay,
So what's interesting to me about that is that when you think of the astral plane, you think of potentially a borderland.
yes,
And, when you're looking at some of these spaces where this watcher has been seen and the times of day, these are liminal times of day and usually liminal states that people are in when they're witnessing this.
yeah,
And when you're thinking about the astral plane, you think of a similar relationship to that space, I think, in what people are reporting. So
yes.
is it possible that this watcher or this hat man just resides in that liminal space in some areas, and he is from the astral realm, and he just enjoys sunsets or something, and he's coming.
But yeah, that kind of makes sense that he stays there. I just don't understand why he would get people and bring them there. So
It's so fascinating that you put those folks together and that they were essentially finishing each other's story.
yeah, they were describing the place.
Did you do a podcast on that?
Yeah, but it's in Tagalog.
Yeah.
It's in Filipino.
We gotta make an English language version of that one together. It's pretty amazing, man.
Yeah,
That's cool.
So maybe if you again with the people you're talking to, maybe you would encounter or ask the question off camera for people who've experienced this, because apparently a lot of psychics have. Sam actually remember when I asked Sam about it. He said Sam, did you see the Hatman or just the endless corridor?
Just the endless corridor, and yeah, I didn't see the Hatman. I don't think I've ever seen a Hatman. But it's so funny that you mentioned that, he just enjoys the sunset, specifically in California, though it's so weird.
Yeah, there's something to be seen, you know. No, that's really interesting. I had a guest on a night drift, and it was this woman. She's French. I wish I could remember her name right now. I'm so sorry. It's and she travels the spirit realm and has a lot of understanding of that. And I think what she was describing as the spirit realm is maybe exactly what you're describing as the astral realm, or what some of these individuals are. And it is that place of many possibilities, of a lot of potential. And I think a place where is kind of seemingly for some of these individuals, and maybe Sam has more insight on this, but like in what I've observed is almost like a meeting place or a watering hole for folks to connect with spirits. And that for folks that make practice out of that, like this is where they're going to meet grandpa, for the reading for his granddaughter, and this is where they are, so it's you look at the mythology that we have too about these in-between spaces, between life and death. And I think that's where some of this gets incredibly interesting too, is that when we start thinking about that meaning of life aspect to all of this, and the meaning of death, like we're talking about some of the most fundamental questions that we have as human beings, right? And it's like, are we alone? Do ghosts exist? What's on the other side? What happens after I die? And what if the answers to those things all, like, what if they're maybe similar answers? That's a fascinating idea.
Jim, you might have again before we close. Do you have questions for us for the stuff that you've heard about the Philippines or the?
I mean, I have so many questions. One of the things that I really I will want to talk with you guys again. And I think, like, if you'd like to come on Night Drift, I'd love to have you as guests, because I hold so much respect for what I have learned about the Philippines from Sapphire, for example.
Yeah.
That I'll have a lot of questions about some of the stories she told me, some of the entities that are experienced there. And I'm just also so curious about the relationship Filipinos have with the paranormal, and I know places that are very devout, very religious, have a bit of a different relationship than places that are full of heathens, like the Pacific Northwest. But or the West Coast generally, let's just say that, or the United States. I don't know what's going on here. But I'm really curious about that. I'll tell you, like, I'm planning on going over there. So
okay, just let us know.
Yeah, I'll have a lot of questions. I think you guys will be really important in that.
You should go with us in that road trip that we're planning.
Oh, actually, yes. We were planning something. The restrictions lift. We were inspired, actually, again, I'll tell you that. We're inspired by Euphomet, that you would actually go to these people and to these places. And this podcast started rolling, producing episodes because of the pandemic, because we were stuck at home, and I got Zoom and again talking to people, but you would go to these places, and we were inspired because we said, let's go on a road trip, because Liz has an ancestral home which is haunted, and they're further in the north. There's another house there that is very, very haunted. Okay, let's go there.
Yeah, it's so cool. Well, I mean, to me it's really exciting, and one of the things that I'm most excited and I'm so happy that you connected is that, listen, the United States, and essentially the Western world, when it comes to the paranormal and when it comes to the phenomena in general, it's a lot of the same stories over and over again. and it lacks in authenticity in terms of what is happening with the phenomenon through a varied set of cultures and countries. There's no global identity or idea about what some of this stuff could be. And the part about that I don't like is that some of my best friends live in other countries and are from different cultures. And it's these sort of things, like sharing great food, right? Or having a shared love of beaches, right? Or loving like Marvel films or whatever that may be. These touch points within our own lives that we can share together that bring cultures closer to each other, that show us that we all have unique and really incredible individual upbringings potentially, but that we're also like very much more similar and just exactly the same in so many other ways, right? So that there's a lack of that work being done in the paranormal space, in my opinion. And so I would love to help like amplify, your voices. And I would be so excited to do that. So yeah, I'm gonna crash your ghost hunt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, just let us know.
Just let us know when. And then Liz right here will sponsor our ticket. We should get a sponsor going to direct. We should, if ever that Jim comes in, I think that it's not gonna be just for the northern part. I think that we should bring him near Biringan, near Samar.
Ah, yes, that's
I
another
think that's
story.
where
Oh
something
my God,
that
let's go to
Jim would be
Biringan.
interested in.
Again, Jim, I know. I know, Jim, you have to go, but just a quick story. But we have this place in the southern part where I said that I have a feeling that Lemuria was partly there. They have a hidden city. It's supposedly inhabited by, again, elves, or we call them Encanto, but they're elves. Then they live in this high-tech hidden city, and people who live there have been transported to that city without them knowing. They're just walking the forests, and then suddenly they see large buildings. And again, it's been said that it's a hidden city. And again, we try to relate it to hidden cities in England. And again, the stories are the same. They are a different race or something. I don't know.
Right.
We're still trying to figure it out. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Oh man, sign me up. Okay.
So Liz, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's include JM. So 5 tickets to Samar, please. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate it, guys. This is so much fun. I'm so glad that we met and
Yeah,
we
us
got to
too.
do this. And hopefully just the beginning. Love to have you on very soon too.
Thank you for talking with us and sharing also, Jim. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Just let us know.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
My pleasure. See you
Bye-bye.
guys.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you, Jim, for taking the time to guest on our podcast. I'm a big fan, and I'm happy this interview pushed through. If you enjoy a deep dive into the paranormal, I suggest you subscribe and listen to Euphomet and Night Drift. Euphomet is in its 5th season right now. It's just started, so please head on over there. Jim talks to experts in the field, experiencers, practitioners of esoteric arts, and more. Links to Euphomet and Night Drift are in the show notes. Personally, I have a few favorite episodes. In one episode, Jim talks to a shapeshifter, someone who can physically change what they look like. It isn't glamour magic, it's physical manipulation. Jim's conversations with John E.L. Tenney are also very interesting to listen to. For me, it's always a pleasure to see the similarities and experiences with people over there in North America. The insight of the person who could communicate with Bigfoot through thought started me thinking about the similarities with capres. Bigfoots are seen in forests, near trees, not necessarily smoking a cigar, but in the vicinity of trees and forests. Same place where capres are seen as well. They are described similarly. They're dark and tall and sometimes hairy. Listeners know that I have a healthy obsession connecting the creatures of folklore from all around the globe. I always hope that we get to see more connections. Are you a Euphomet fan as well? Have you been experiencing things that go bump in the night? Feel free to email us at paranormalsph@gmail.com or message us on Facebook. If you want to have a post-show discussion, head over to our Discord server where we have a healthy, open-minded discussion about all the paranormal topics of interest. A side note, people there have met their new BFFs, new shopping friends, and a reunion between twin spirit guides as well. No, that is not a joke. If that piqued your curiosity, do head over there and lurk or participate. The choice is yours. Obviously, most of it is in Tagalog, so if you are an English-speaking person, you will have to get someone to translate for you. A big thank you to our paranormal Patreons, Sunny, Pat, Jay, and Dawn. Your support helps keep the podcast episodes coming out in time. For those of you who are interested in supporting the podcast through Patreon, you can look at the links. There are different tiers to choose from. You can also support us with a cup of coffee through Kofi. So the links for these are in the show notes below. Thank you, everyone. If you want to support us in another way, you can always share your favorite episodes to like-minded individuals. Opening minds about the paranormal is the goal of the podcast. You might not believe in all of it, but at least you are open to the possibilities. The Paranormal Podcast is engineered and produced by F90 Productions. If you have the time, please leave us a review on your preferred delivery platform. A like, a share, and a subscribe. It really goes a long way to get the word out there. Thank you for listening, and please stay safe. Hello sa mga Latak listeners. Very specific itong LL portion na to for the Latak listeners who participated in the Latak Zoom call, which is a few days ago from when I'm recording this. Inabot ng 5 hours. 5 hours yon, pero pagkatapos ng call, umabot pa ng 3 a.m. plus 2 pa yata yan hours. So, dami kasi talaga baon. Daming pinag-usapan. So, thank you to all the contributors. Daming kwento na na-share. Na-excite tuloy ako edit yung mountain experiences kasi at least buo na. And lagpas 1 oras na siya. So maganda yon. Madaming ambag si Crow X na nakakatakot. So salamat, sir. Educational rin syempre yung mga nakwento ni Crow X kasi andun yung ibang basic rules in climbing and all that. So actually, buo naman yung thought sa mountain climbing episode kasi yung first guest namin, ganun rin. Nagbigay rin siya ng tips and rules kung anong ginagawa usually sa climbs. These are not hard and fast rules pero ito yung sinusunod nila. Thank you rin sa mama ni Audley na buksan tuloy ang usapan sa mga aswang. Paano sila nagko-coexist, anong ginagawa nila sa Aswang Council. So sa mga hindi nakasama, pasensya na. Maraming inside jokes na dahil doon. Pero may na-mention mom ni Audley kasi na may Aswang Council na nagaganap sa medyo higher portion of the atmosphere. Ano kaya napag-uusapan nila doon? Sinong bibiktimahin? Sino yung off-limits? Anong bagong recipe ng atay? Ewan ko. Pero peace tayo. Kung may nakikinig na aswang dyan o may latak listener na aswang, peace tayo. Iniisip ko lang naman kung anong pinag-uusapan nyo sa High Council. Sa totoo lang, ang saya nung huling LL session. Parang magandang gawin once a month or once in 2 months. Let's see. Hindi naman kailangan recorded kung ayaw nyo, di ba? Parang kamustahan lang, parang get together lang, di ba? Parang kulang yung araw-araw na kulitan sa Discord, no? Pero up to you guys. Let me know. I can host the Zoom call, tapos, ayan, magwansusawa kayo. Anyway, pag-usapan natin sa Discord kung ano yung feel nyo. Meron rin palang anonymous donor tayo doon. So, meron nag-message sa akin anonymously na kung magkakaroon nga doon ng monthly, paparaffle siya ng pa-Gcash. Pa-raffle na pa-Gcash every month, o, di ba? So, let's see if matuloy yung monthly na LL session. So, yun na muna. Parang di pa ako nakak-decompress dun sa ano na yun. Kwentuhan na yun. Grabe. 5 oras. Iba nga, nagising na ng hapon yata. So, ayun. Thank you, LLs. Ingat sa lahat.